Today's daf we're going to learn is Ketubot Daf Lamed Chet. This is the daf for Shabbat. If you didn't catch Shuli Mishkan's flashback for this week, it's about captives and recommended reading for Shabbat if you want. Okay, we're going to get started right now with the starting with the very end of yesterday's daf. So quick review. We started with a slew of psukim that were all about. We started with Lo Tiklu Kofer L'Nefesh Rotzeach, which first we thought was a din of Kimle, that it meant you can't pay, you don't have to pay if you're liable for the death penalty. And then the question was, why is there a third pasuk? Because we already had Lo Yason, which talked about death and monetary payment. And then we had Kedei Rishato, which already taught you the law of Kimle when it comes to Malkot and Mammon, right? Lashes and money, or according to Rabbi Meir, lashes and death penalty. So you certainly don't need a third pasuk. So to which they said, no, lo tiklu kofer lenefesh rotzeach, don't take ransom, right? Don't pay money in place of death meant you can't pay your way out of a death penalty. And then from there, we got into a bunch of other psukim that seemed to sound like the same thing. We got to this pasuk kol cherem mina asher yachara min adam lo yipadeh mot yumat, which sounded like the same thing. Someone who's liable death by the hands of man shouldn't, right, doesn't need to be redeemed or can't be redeemed. Sorry, it should mean can't be redeemed. Mot yumat, he has to die, which seemed to be saying the same thing. The first answer we had was, oh no, that pasuk is meant for something else entirely. That pasuk is meant for if someone's liable the death penalty and somebody says, I'm giving the value of that person to the temple, they actually don't have to give anything because that person's value is nothing. Lo yipadeh means there's no monetary value to that person, so you don't have to redeem them, meaning you don't have to bring their value to the temple. However, that answer only worked according to one Tana, but Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia disagrees with that and actually thinks he does pay money to the temple, in which case you can't say that's what that verse is coming to say, because in the laws of Erechim, there's a set value to every person. It doesn't matter if you're liable to the death penalty. So what does he do with kol cherem? We said he learns that toward the end of the daf of yesterday's daf, Lamed Zayin Amud Bet, lefi shematzinu b'mumatim b'idei shamayim shenotnim mamonu mitkapel im kofer yushat alav. In a case where someone's liable death by the hands of God, you can pay your way out. You would have thought that you can also be de'adam, to which the Gemara said, that's what you learn. Cherem min adam lo yipadeh. If you're liable death by the hands of God, you don't have to pay money. Okay, which again, sorry, you can't pay money, right? In a case of death by the hands of God, which was the case we talked about when your ox killed somebody else, theoretically, you're supposed to die by the hands of God, but if you pay your way out, that will atone for you. But that doesn't apply when you're liable to the death penalty. To which the Gemara asked, wait a minute, how could you say that law is learned out from kol cherem? We already learned that from lo tiklu kofer l'nefesh rotzeach, that if you're a murderer, you can't pay your way out. So that's teaching the exact same thing. So that's where we ended yesterday. And now we're starting with Rami Bar Chama's answer. We're going to have three answers here because we're going to have issues with the first two. Ami Rami Bar Chama, Itzrich. We really need both psukim, okay? We need the second one. Why? So Rashi says that what he means to be referring to is this is the case when the pasuk says lo tikhu kofel, to exempt a rotzeach, right? Don't take money in place of death. That's only if harago derech aliyah. But why is that different? Why does it matter if you killed someone by throwing something up rather than killing someone by throwing something down? Well, shelo nitna shigato lekapara. This comes up by Ir Miklat, by a refuge city. There's a whole discussion. We'll get to this when we get to the Ir Miklat cases. But the pasuk there says, if it says vayapel, it's vayapel. The pasuk says vayapel. If fall, right, you made something fall on someone and killed them. Then you go to a refuge city. From there, they learn when do you get to atone by going to a refuge city if it's derech yirida, on its way down. Aval haragod, right? So if it's derech aliyah, you don't get the Ir Miklat serves both as a punishment, but also atonement. Okay, there's cases where you can't go to the Ir Miklat, which means you can't get the atonement either. On the one hand, you'd have the punishment. On the other hand, you don't get atonement. So if it's done derech aliyah, shelo nitna shigato lekapara, There you don't have, if you had done it unwittingly, you wouldn't have a way to get atoned. So maybe that's when you can't pay your way out. Aval harago derech yerida dinitna shigato lekapara. Since you have a way, if you had done it unwittingly, you have a way to get atonement by going to the refuge city. Maybe you would think, maybe when you do it intentionally, we give you a way out that's an alternative, which is by paying your way out. Kamash malan, that's why you need both verses, not just lo tikru kofel, because that would maybe only say derech aliyah, but derech yerida as well. We're going to learn from kol cherem asher chara min ha'adam. Okay, that's why we need two psukim. However, Amalei Rava says, what are you talking about? When you know already that we don't distinguish between between derech aliyah and derech yerida from where? Do you remember where we saw these before? We already learned this from Tana de Bechizkiah. Now, I will say the Tana de Bechizkiah, what was it teaching us? Okay, let's read it, and then I'm going to point out something very important to notice here. But the Tana de Bechizkiah, Makeh Adam u Makeh Behema. Ma Makeh Behema, remember that verse? Makeh Behema yishalmena. If you hit an animal, you pay. U Makeh Adam yumad. And if you hit a person and kill them, you die. So, because these are juxtaposed in the verse, they say something must be the same about both. If you hit an animal, it doesn't matter if you were intentional or unwitting about it. Whether you intended specifically to hit this animal or not. It doesn't matter if you hit him by an action that was going upward or an action going downward. You never get exempt from payment. You always have to pay. Now, the last time we explained this, we said that what this is coming to teach you is there's no distinction when you do it, when you kill a person, between unwitting and intentional, whether it was intended for this person or not intended for this person, or whether it was going on the upward motion or a downward motion, in order to pay money, meaning you never pay money. What do we mean? We understood this to mean the law of kimle b'derabamine, right? That in the case where you're liable, the death penalty, you don't pay money. And even if, we use this to say, right, even if it was accidental and you don't even get the death penalty because you weren't warned, you still are not going to pay money. But now the Gemara is using it. I want you to note this distinction, not for the laws of Kible, but for the laws of you can't pay your way out. You can't say, I'll pay money instead of getting the death penalty. So that's what it means. You're exempt from Mammon doesn't really mean you're exempt, but it means you can't pay your way out instead of getting the death penalty. So just note that they're using this differently than it was used originally, okay? It somehow is explained right now to mean both those things, both for laws of Kimle and for laws of, remember, this distinction is very important because, again, we brought the pasuk, and I want you to understand this because in a minute we're going to switch back. But we brought the pasuk, lo tichlu kofer lenefesh rotzeach, meaning you can't pay ransom for a murderer. We thought it meant originally Kimle. That means, right, if you're a murderer, you get death penalty and you don't need to pay money. Then the Gemara said, no, we don't need it for that. We already have two verses for that, right? Or one verse specifically for death. So we don't need that. We're going to say that this comes to say you can't pay your way out of a death penalty, okay? And that's what we're on right now. So they're now saying we need two verses for that halacha, lo tichlu kofer and kol cherem asher charam min ha'adam, right? Lo yipade, you can't pay your way out, just like you can't pay your way out. Both are coming to say the same thing. One is talking about derech aliyah, one is derech yerida, but we reject that. Rava rejects it because Rava says we already get that idea from Tana Bechizkiah. So we don't need a verse to teach you this, another one. To which we're going to have answer number 2 of Rami Bar Chama, Ela Ama Rami Bar Chama. So now since his answer got knocked out, he's going to bring a different answer. Itzrich. We need them. And now we're going to go back to our original. This is why I specifically set it up before. Look, we're really going to say that kol cherem is to teach you can't pay your way out of a death penalty. Lo tikhu kofar, the nefesh rotzeach is going to go back to what we thought originally, is coming to teach you the laws of kimle b'derabban, okay, that when there's a death penalty, you don't have to pay money. And now he's going to say the following. Okay, answer 2 and 3 is going to be on this track. When does kimle, if you own, now, again, we have 3 psukim for kimle now. Kedei Rishato, we're going to put aside. It's not important right now because that's teaching lashes and money. So that's not our issue. Right now, we're talking about death and money. Death always is going to override monetary payment. We now have 2 verses to teach that. Lo tikhu kofel and lo yason anosh yanesh. Right? If the fetus is, if only you lose the fetus, then you pay money. But if there was a death, if she died, then there's no money payment. So now they're going to say, if we only have 1 pasuk, you would have thought, Hanamile, that's only if you blinded the person, and with that, at the same moment, you killed them. So let's say you blind someone, and maybe because of that injury that it causes their death, or you hit them somehow in one motion that both knocks out their eye and kills them. But again, this all gets down to how kimle works. But if you blinded them, and at the exact same moment, it would have to be the exact same moment. At the exact same moment, let's say with one hand, you punched their eye out. With the other hand, you took a rock and threw it at or you took a knife, let's make it easier, and you stabbed them at the same time. So at the same time, you knocked their eye out with one hand, the other hand, you stab them and kill them all in the same moment, but with 2 different actions, okay? And 2 different maybe implements or something. You might have thought that kimle only works when it's 1 action. But if you somehow do 2 actions, even though they happen at the same time, you might have thought maybe there's no din of kimle. Maybe you still have to pay for the eye and then also get killed. So therefore, you need the second verse to teach you, no, if they happen at the same time, it doesn't matter if it was 2 different actions, you're still going to have the laws of kimle and you won't have to pay money. That's answer number 2. So again, what we've done is we've switched lo tikhu kofar back to meaning laws of kimle, and we need 2 different psukim to teach you this law. But Rava comes again and contradicts Rami Bar Chama and knocks out his answer and says, Amale Rava, keeps pulling out Brightot from the house of Chizkiah, and he says that's also learned out already from a different halacha. Titana de Bechizkiah, ayin tachat ayin, below ayin v'nefesh tachat ayin. Okay, this is a little bit difficult to understand, and Rashi explains something which commentaries also have difficulty understanding, but I'll try to explain it in a particular manner. Again, there's different ways to understand Rashi here, but what does he say? Ayin tachat ayin is a very famous pasuk, an eye for an eye. Right now, the law is we don't do an eye for an eye. We don't take the Torah literally. So we're going to see that in Rashi right now. Look at Rashi, lo ayin v'nefesh tachat ayin. It's about a line or 2 above in Rashi, above where we are in the Gemara. Mine kaim alam ba'achovel. Okay, this is already established in Perek HaChovel. The ayin tachat ayin lav mamash. Okay, that's in Masechet Baba Kama. Ayin tachat ayin doesn't mean if you knock someone's eye out, we take out your eye. Why not? Here Rashi gives an interesting explanation. Di'i amart mamash, if you said literally, take out your eye, dilma bahade desamena la'ene, could be that while we're taking out your eye, might will kill you by accident, okay? Could cause your death. That's what we have here. Below ayin v'nefesh tachat ayin. We don't take out your eye and your soul. We don't kill you because you knocked out someone's eye. So that's why we don't do ayin tachat ayin literally, because it could actually cause your death. But now here's a bit of a jump. Now from here, we're going to say, you don't do 2, right? Now, what does it mean? You have to really, and one of the commentators explains Rashi is saying like this. What it really means is not only lo ayin v'nefesh tachat ayin, which would really mean what Rashi said, which is we don't want to take out your eye and kill you for the fact that you took someone else's eye out. But now we're understanding it to mean something more, which is below ayin tachat nefesh v'ayin. It's not if you take out someone's eye and kill them, then we don't make you pay for the eye because you're already getting the death penalty. So it's not exactly directly learned from these words below ayin v'nefesh tachat ayin, but he seems to make this jump. If you're going to say that we can't knock out your eye and kill you because you took out someone's eye, then also we're going to say ayin tachat ayin and not ayin tachat ayin v'nefesh, right? That if you killed someone and took out their eye, then we're not going to make you pay for the eye. Okay, so it's a jump here, and it's not exactly clear from the Gemara. It's obvious where the Gemara wants to go with this. It's not obvious how the Gemara gets there. Ela Amar Rav Ashi. So basically, you can't say that that's the law that the extra pasuk is teaching you, because that's already learned out from time to Bechizki. So now Rami Bar Chama, I guess, had no other answer. Now comes Rav Ashi. Ela Amar Rav Ashi. Itzrich. We need it. Why? 2 psukim to teach the same law. Okay, we're getting back to this law of Rabbah again, which everyone agrees with the principle. The knas, having to pay a penalty or a fine for something, is a chidush. It's something new. Because again, to reimburse you for money I made you lose is clear. That's obvious. But it's a chidush that we're going to make you pay a penalty for something that doesn't have exactly a monetary value. It's not like we caused some decrease in money for you, so therefore we're paying you back. No, knas is something additional. You might have thought, since knas is a chidush, something unique that the Torah established, you might have thought, afagav de miktal mishalem, you might have thought, even though you get the death penalty, you still pay knas. Kamash malan. This obviously goes against Rabbah, who actually thinks knas is an exception to the rule. But comes the Gemara here, Rav Ashi explains, the reason we have 2 drashot, also lo tikul kofer, in addition to lo yason anosh yanesh, is to teach you, one is teaching you the basic law, death and mammon. The second one is teaching you that the death overrides mammon. You don't have to pay monetary payments. Not only that, you also don't have to pay knasot, fines. Now, what's the problem? Now, I want to remind you where we're up to. This is only according to Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia. You have to remember this. Before, we had 2 explanations. We started with the pasuk kol cherem asher yacharam, right? Mina adam lo yipadeh mot yumat. We explained that according to one interpretation, it means that if you give the value of that person to the temple, a person who's liable to the death penalty, you don't have to pay anything. But Hananya ben Akavi, who doesn't hold that way, would have to explain that pasuk differently. The whole question we're asking was all according to him only. So when the Gemara now asks, since knas is a special law, unique, that the Torah taught us, it actually is an exception to the rule. And even though you get the death penalty, you still have to pay the knas. So he can't use kol cherem to teach that. So, hi kol cherem my avalei, what is he going to do with that verse? So the obvious answer is, as we said last time, he must hold like Rabbi Yochanan, not Rabbi Rish Lakish, because Rish Lakish wouldn't work according to him. Same thing here. And we're going to see the same answer further on today. We're going to have another question against him. You'd have to say that he holds by the first explanation and uses kol cherem to teach you this law about erchin, okay, about giving the value of a person to the temple, and it has nothing to do with kimle b'derabba mine. Otherwise, you have no answer according to Rabbah, because the only way we could understand the other side, Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia, would be to say this issue about afagav de mikta, would be to say that even though knas is a chiddush, you still have a law of kimle, and that's why we need it as well. And again, that explanation took this pasuk back to teaching the laws of kimle, whereas according to the first explanation, we kept it as the way we understood it originally, or as we understood it after the Gemara answered, not originally, but the second explanation was, it means you don't pay instead of getting the death penalty. So we have 2 ways to understand that verse, and then that affects how we go from there. Okay, new Mishnah. A woman who was betrothed and then got divorced, and then she gets raped. So she's not married. She was never actually married, but she was betrothed to someone. So Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer, Ema Knas, because the pasuk says, Asher lo orasa, she wasn't engaged. Remember, it says Nara Betula, Asher lo orasa, she was a Na'ara, she was a Betula, she was a virgin, and she was never engaged. So he says, Ema Knas. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Yesh la Knas, she does have Knas, Uknasala Atzma. But instead of it going to her father, it goes to her. Because when she was betrothed, she somewhat leaves the domain of her father. We're going to talk about this soon because it's not necessarily so clear. Then she gets the knas herself. And we're going to see later in a Mishnah, I think it's on Mem Aleph, that there's cases where if the woman was raped when she was an na'ara, but by the time they finished the judgment, she became a bogeret, already beyond the age of 12 and 6 months, then she also gets the knas herself. So there's some precedent for this, that she gets the knas. So my time in Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Gemara asked, why does he say asher lo ein la knas? Amar kra asher lo orasa ha'orasa ein la knas. Asher lo orasa, he understands to mean she was never engaged, and if she was engaged, she must not get knas. But Rabbi Akiva says no. Asher lo orasa la'avia ha'orasa la'atzma. He takes the words asher lo orasa. I want you to understand the psukim. The pasuk says, "Ki imtza ish na'ara betula asher lo orasa utvasa v'shachav ima v'nimtza." If a man finds a woman, a na'ara, right, this in between ktana, minor, and bogeret, mature, right, she's in those 6 months, and she's a betula, asher lo orasa, that wasn't betrothed, and he grabs her and sleeps with her, v'nimtza, when they're found, then it says, v'natan lavi na'ara, he pays the father of the girl 50 kas. Now, what does it say? What does Rabbi Akiva do? He takes the words asher lo orasa, not to describing the rape or what happened, but what he says is, it says if you take a woman who's an na'ara betula, who is never engaged, and he basically applies it to the second pasuk. He gives to the father of this girl if she was never engaged. So he kind of pulls it from that pasuk and puts it into the second verse. He's going to pay the father if she was lo orasa, if she had the criteria from the previous verse. You'll see why the Gemara is going to start questioning him. But right now, that he basically says that means it goes to her father. Okay, but if it doesn't have all those details, meaning she was already betrothed, then ha'orasa la'atzma. To which the Gemara asks, okay, well, if you're going to say that however we describe the woman applies to why the knas goes to her father, but if those criteria aren't there, the knas goes to her. So elameata na'ara v'lo bogeret, if she's a na'ara and not a bogeret, right? So another criteria in that pasuk, are you going to also say hachinami delatzma? It also goes to her. What if she's beyond the age of 12 and 6 months? Maybe she does get knas, and maybe the knas goes to her. And betula v'lo beula. What if she's not a virgin? Maybe also then, maybe she gets the money herself. It's a great havamina, right? It fits with our modern idea, which is, why is this person not liable to pay the knas if he raped a woman? Who cares if she's a virgin or not a virgin? Who cares if she's a na'ara or a bogeret, right? Theoretically, maybe those criteria are only relevant that she's still in her father's domain. Once she's already not a virgin, once she's already beyond the age of 12 and 6 months, maybe she's in her own domain, and then she should get the money. Now, it's nice that the Gemara actually suggests this as a thought that maybe she would still get knas in that case. They're going to say in the end she doesn't, but it is interesting that they suggest it. So now they're going to say, Ela legambre, hachanami legambre. So then they say to Rabbi Akiva, if you want to take asher lo orasa and say, that doesn't mean there's no knas at all, it just means the knas goes to her, then you should do the same thing for the bogeret, and you should do the same thing for the beula, for the woman who already is not a virgin, and you should say she gets the knas. And they're assuming Rabbi Akiva doesn't hold that. So Amar Lecha Rabbi Akiva, that means Rabbi Akiva would say to explain himself, Hi lo orasa mebayile l'chidetanya. So the answer is really the words lo orasa are needed for, as we're going to see in this drasha. It'll take us a few minutes till we get to the words, how he darshans asher lo orasa. So bear with me. Asher lo orasa. Prat lenara shenit arsa v'nitgarsha she'en la knas divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So this is first Rabbi Yossi Aglili, not Rabbi Akiva. Asher lo orasa, as we already learned, comes according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili to exclude a woman who is betrothed and divorced. Even though now she's not betrothed, she was betrothed, so she's out of this whole section. Okay, there's no issue of rape to this woman. There's no penalty having to be paid to anybody. Rabbi Akiva Omer, yesh la knas, she does get knas. Okay, we're bringing this bright to see how he darshans the psukim, asher lo orasa, those words, but we're not there yet. Yesh la knas, and the next words are very surprising. Uknasa la'avia, and the knas goes to the father. Why is this surprising? Because we just said in our Mishnah that Rabbi Akiva says the knas goes to her. So we're going to have to deal with this later, with this contradiction between Rabbi Akiva says in the Mishnah and Rabbi Akiva says in the Bright. That's not why we brought this. Soon we'll get there. V'hadim noten. Rabbi Akiva says it's very logical. Why is it logical that the father should get the knas and that she gets knas? Well, ho'il va'avia zakai b'kesef kiddusheha, va'avia zakai b'kesef knasa. In general, there's certain rights a father has to his daughter's money. So, for example, if he betroths his daughter, he marries her off to somebody else. So the money of the kiddushin, this is right, you get a ring normally nowadays, right? The woman gets a ring from the man. In those days, right, it could have been money. It just has to be something with monetary value, whatever it was, if it was a ring, it really belongs to the father because she's a minor, right? Or she's still even an ara, goes to the father. And what else goes to the father? Just like money of kiddushin, also the knas of the rapist goes to the father. So now they're going to say, Ma kesef kiddusheha, afal pi shenit'arsa v'nitgarsha l'avia. The woman gets betrothed and divorced from the betrothal. Her father betroths her again. He gets the money. Now, if she was already married, then no. If she's married and divorced, then gets married again, betrothed, the money of the betrothal goes to her. But if she's betrothed and divorced from the betrothal before she was actually married, she still remains in her father's domain, and the father gets the money of the kiddushin. So since that's the case, and we've already compared the kesef of the money of the betrothal to the money of the penalty of the rapist, we're going to say af kesef knasa, af al pishnit arsa v'nitgarsha la'avia. Likewise, the money from if she was betrothed and divorced, the father will get the money from the knas as well. Im kain. Now here comes why we brought this braita. Im kain. Right. Remember, this goes against Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah, who says the knas goes to herself at that point. But the main point right now we're focusing in on is she gets the knas, okay, whether it's her or the father, but there is a knas. He has to pay it. Whereas again, Rabbi Yossi Aglili said he doesn't pay in this case. So so what's this lo arasa coming for if you're going to say that asher lo arasa and also Kain orasa, even if she was betrothed, the father still gets the money, then what's that verse coming for? Well, mufne. It's actually it's extra words, because you don't really need them to teach the simple reading, because it doesn't fit in with the simple reading, but it's there to teach Gzera Shava. What Gzera Shava? Well, Ne'emar kana shelo rasa. Okay, our section about the rape case is in Dvarim, chapter 22. Okay, Deuteronomy. Well, in the psukim about the mefateh, a man who seduces a woman, actually appears not in Dvarim chapter 22, but it appears in Shemot chapter 22. Okay, totally separate section. There comes the psukim about someone who seduces a woman. Now, there it also says asher lo arasa. So we're going to do a Gzera Shava and learn from one to the other. Now, we already learned this actually from a different method, but obviously Rabbi Akiva didn't learn it that way. Okay, and we're going to get back to what we learned already. We learned this some other way. We're going to get back to it later. But right now, we're going to say, Ma kan chamishim af lahalan chamishim. Do you remember when we looked at the verses? We saw that in the Arusa case, the betrothed woman, it said he has to pay 50 kesef. It didn't say what kind of currency. It just said money, but 50. And when it talked about the seducing case, it says if the father doesn't want to marry him off to have his daughter marry this man, then he has to pay her kesef yishkol kemor habtulot. It said there kesef yishkol, meaning shkalim. We had the currency, but it didn't say how much. So we're going to learn from one to the other. Right? So the Gzera Shava Asher Lo Rasa, which appears in both, means we can learn from one to the other. So we're going to learn just like here in the rape case, it's 50. Likewise, in the seduction case, it's also 50. And just like there it's shkalim, here it's also shkalim. Well, Rabbi Akiva, now they're going to ask, Rabbi Akiva, I don't understand. It's a little arbitrary. Why did you take those words and say they're unnecessary and not the reverse? Why didn't you say bitula is needed for the Gzera Shava? And then, right, then we wouldn't necessarily exclude a bi'ula and yet say asher lo rasa comes to exclude a woman who is betrothed and divorced. Maybe there is no knas for her. But why did you say asher lo rasa for the Gzera Shava? And betula, we're going to understand literally that it comes to exclude a woman who's not a virgin anymore. Ema, why don't you say the reverse? We're now in Amabet. Betula l'gzera shava, the word betula comes say virgin, but not a non-virgin. I'm sorry, why didn't you use betula for the gzera shava? Because betula also appears in both places, in the onus and the mefuta. And asher lo arasa would then come to say, prat l'na'ara shenit arsa v'nit garsha, comes to exclude the case of this woman who was betrothed and divorced. To which the Gemara says, well, mistabra, it's more logical to say, asher lo arasa l'gzera shava, shahare ani koreba na'ara betula. Well, it's very hard to say that na'ara betula would mean someone who's not a virgin when it says a na'ara who's a virgin. So it would be very hard to say that. So the Gemara says, well, adraba, betula l'gzera shava, shahare ani koreba, asher lo arasa. You say for the same price, it's very hard to say asher lo arasa, which means she was not yet betrothed, is coming to include a woman, right? It also means someone who was already betrothed. In other words, it's arbitrary. What if you're going to say one of them has to be for gzera shava? It's not clear why you're choosing one over the other. What you're basically doing is taking one out of its simple reading. So why are you taking asher lo rasa out of the simple reading and not betula out of the simple reading? To which the Gemara says, mistaber. Now, it does make sense to make this distinction. This is a distinction we've seen in the past, particularly in Yevamot. Ha ishtani gufa, ha lo ishtani gufa. The betula versus the beula had a change in her body, right? Her hymen is torn. She's no longer a virgin. Whereas the woman who was betrothed and divorced from the betrothal, nothing really changed. She hadn't yet been with her husband. So nothing in her body changed at all. So that's a more minor change than the change from virgin to non-virgin. So that's why we're going to make more of a big deal about that one and assume that one is understood literally. Virgin versus non-virgin, whereas asher lo rasa, maybe we could explain in some other way. Okay, and then say that's really used for the gzera shava. Okay, soon we're going to get back and say that it's still really not right. The Rabbi Akiva and the Braita, certainly when it says if she was betrothed, it still goes to the father, really is not the simple reading, and we're going to have to deal with that. But before we deal with that, we want to go back to something about Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Gufa. Rabbi Yossi Aglili, hai svara minale. But I'm sorry, not Gufa. Sorry. Rabbi Yossi Aglili, hai svara minale. Rabbi Yossi Aglili, where does he get this hamishim and shkalim, right? What Rabbi Akiva learned through gzera shava, he doesn't have this gzera shava. So where does he learn it from? And this is where we're going to review what we saw last time. Nafkalemi Ditanya. He learns it from the following Braita. Kesef yishkol kemoa habetulot. Again, it says by the mefuta, by the seducing case. If the father doesn't want to marry off the man to the woman, right? This couple doesn't want to let them get married. Kesef, right? It's also, by the way, if she doesn't want to. Kesef yishkol kemora habetulot. He gets money like the mora habetulot. So now, what do they learn from this? Yehezek kemora habetulot. That this amount of money is learned out from the mora habetulot, which is what the rapist has to pay. And mora habetulot and the rapist is learned out kazeh. Again, we're going to learn the rapist, what kind of currency, we're going to learn it out from the mefuta, the seduction case. So he learns it from totally different words. Now the Gemara goes back to our big issue, which is, wait a minute, but kasha de Rabbi Akiva de Rabbi Akiva. The Braita says she gets the knas if she was betrothed and divorced. There is knas and it goes to the father. And Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah said that there is knas, but it goes to her. So that's a clear contradiction in what Rabbi Akiva says. To which the Gemara answers very simply, Trei Tanai Valiba de Rabbi Akiva. There's two different Tanaitic opinions about what Rabbi Akiva held. This happens very often. We have two versions of what one rabbi held. So we don't really know which one he says. So now the Gemara is going to go into a bit of a problem with one of them, as I mentioned earlier. Bishlama Rabbi Akiva dematniti. Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah makes a lot of sense. Because lo ati gzera shava umavkale lekami pashte legamri. It's one thing to say you need these words for gzera shava, but it's another thing to say that they remove, right, that they're entirely ignored in terms of the simple reading of the verse. In other words, Rabbi Akiva, according to the Mishnah, you could still read asher lo arasa in a simple manner. You could say what it means is, again, if she was never betrothed, then the money doesn't go to then the money goes to the father. But if she was already betrothed, then there is a knas payment that just goes to her. And then the simple reading of the verse is, it's only when she was never, ever betrothed does the money go to the father. But if she was, it goes to her. But Ella Rabbi Akiva de Braita, who says, even if she was betrothed, the money goes to the father, well then, there's no way to read that verse. That verse says, if she was never betrothed, then the money goes to the father. Well, even if she was betrothed, the money goes to the father. So how do you read that? Read it as she is not betrothed, meaning she's not betrothed presently. Okay? That's a different way to read it. It means she's not betrothed right now, meaning if she was betrothed and divorced, but right now she's not connected to any man. Well, then it goes to the father, and then there's a knas. If she's betrothed, then there's no payment. To which the Gemara says, you don't need a verse for that. Of course, if she's betrothed, there's no payment. Why? Right? What does that mean? She is deserving of the death penalty. If she's, now here it's a little tricky, right? This is like we saw the other day. If she's raped by this guy, she's actually not deserving of the death penalty. She was raped and she wasn't a party to this. But what it really means is if he raped her, then he's liable for skila. If he's liable for death penalty by stoning, then what's going to happen? Then he's going to have to, he's going to be exempt from payment, from knas payment, remember? Because kim le b'derabamine. So therefore, you don't need a verse to tell you, and that is again, according to Rabbi Akiva, we're going to say, according to Rabbi Akiva of the Braita, Akiva of the Mishnah, we have a good way to read it. Rabbi Akiva of the Braita, he's going to have to read this, she's not betrothed now, which means if she is betrothed now, then he doesn't have to pay. To which the Gemara says that's obvious. Of course, he doesn't need to pay. You don't need a pasuk to teach you this because it's a basic law of kimle. Well, again, we're going to go back to something we saw earlier. You might have thought, since the whole idea of this penalty is something new, maybe death doesn't override this. Maybe kimle doesn't apply to knas. To which the Gemara is going to say, right, that works. So that's how we're going to explain Rabbi Akiva the Braita, how the pasuk reads. Asher lo rasa comes to exclude it from the laws of kimle, meaning, comes to say, you might have thought the laws of kimle don't apply, and you would have to pay the knas. No, he doesn't have to pay the knas if she's betrothed, because even though it's a knas, and even though that's a unique halacha, the laws of kimle still apply. But of course, we're going to have the question according to Rabbah, who thinks that laws of kimle don't apply to knas. Ule Rabbah damar chidushu shechachat Torah b'knas afagab demikta mashalem ma'ikal meimar. According to Rabbah, who thinks that even though you get the death penalty, you do have to pay knas. So then Asher lo rasa can't read that way. In which case, he has no choice but to say, Savar la ki Rabbi Akiva de matnitin. He would have to read the Mishnah. He would have to read the Torah, Psukim, according to Rabbi Akiva of the Mishnah. The only way he can understand Rabbi Akiva is to understand it through the Rabbi Akiva's opinion according to our Mishnah, which again, Asher lo rasa would mean she was not betrothed, right? She was never betrothed before, because if she was betrothed before, the money wouldn't go to the father, it would go to her, and that's how he would read it. He wouldn't be able to uphold the opinion of Rabbi Akiva and the Braita, because that wouldn't fit, because there's no way to understand Rabbi Akiva the Braita other than to say, Asher lo rasa comes to say she was never betrothed. She isn't betrothed presently. Okay, which would then mean it's teaching you the din of kimle is applicable here, even though it's only a knas, and Rabbah doesn't think that. Okay, two last things in today's daf, two shorter things. Tanu Rabbanan, knasa lemi. We have a braita that says who gets the knas. Now we're assuming right now this means in general. In a minute we'll say no, but right now they assume it means in general. La'avia, to the father. Some people say la'atzma, she gets the knas. To which the Gemara says la'atzma, Maya, could you possibly say she gets the knas? The Torah says explicitly goes to the father. So Amar Rav Chisda, what Rav Chisda says, obviously what we're talking about here, we're talking exactly about our case, about a woman who was betrothed and then divorced and then got raped. And these two opinions are the exact opinions of Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah versus Rabbi Akiva of the Braita. And obviously none of them hold by Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who thinks there's no knas at all. Last issue for today, which we're going to leave in the middle, Amar Abaye, if he has relations with her, meaning he rapes her, and then in the meantime, remember I told you that if she gets older of age, before they finish the judgment, then the knas goes to her. So what if she dies before? So if she dies before the end of the judgment, patul, he doesn't have to pay at all. We actually saw this before. Shne'emar v'natan la'avi hana'ara v'lo la'avi meta. Because it says he gives it to the father of the girl and not to the father of someone who's dead. So basically, if when it comes time to pay the knas, she's not alive anymore, he's exempt. Well, milta dipshita le'Abaye me'baye le'Rava. What was obvious to Abaye that he doesn't have to pay was actually something that Rava questioned. And Rava asked the following question, which is a fascinating question. Debai Rava, yesh beger b'kever or ein beger b'kever? If she were alive, and let's say she was 12 and 3 months when the rape happened, and then she becomes 12 and 6 months already by the time the judgment happens, she's already a bogeret, so the knas would go to her. But what if she dies? Let's say he rapes her age of 12 and 3 months, she dies at 12 and 4 months. Now, let's say the judgment happens at 12 and 6 months, where if she were still alive, she wouldn't be a na'ara anymore, and the money would go to her. But because she died, this is a very fascinating question. Yesh beger bekever. Do we count it as if she was still growing, even though she's dead? Okay, really crazy question, right? Do we view her at the age she would be presently if were she to still be alive? Oh, aim beger bekever. Or do we say no? She died at age 12 and 4 months. That's where, right, she remains at that age forever. So even if the court happens a year later, and she theoretically would have been much older, no, we view it as if it happened when she was still an ara. Now, what's the relevance? And this is going to be a big question. What's he talking about? Yesh beger bekever ude benaha. If we say there's beger bekever, she's not alive anymore to get it anyway, but maybe you would go to her son. The immediate question the Gemara is going to ask is, what son? How could she have had a son? She was just raped and, right, she died and, right, the small time period, and right, it's very weird to think she had a son. Anyway, that will be tomorrow's question. O dilma ain beger bekever udaviyahave. If you say there isn't beger bekever, then the money is going to go to the father. So the question is, to who does the money go? To the son or to the father? Again, to which the Gemara is going to say, umima abra, could she have even been pregnant? And now we're going to see there's no way she could have been pregnant before, because we're going to see a source that says anyone who gets pregnant under the age of 12, basically they can't survive a pregnancy, and there's no way she had a son. Okay, so that's going to be our question. We're going to start with tomorrow, a very interesting question. Anyway, we also end with this interesting question conceptually about how we view people when they die. Do they remain at that age, or do you view them as growing up, which is a whole interesting concept in and of itself. With those interesting thoughts, although difficult ones, right, about children dying young and how they're viewed. Anyway, we will end today's daf, wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov.